So hi, my name is Kenny Barlee. I work at the University of Strathclyde in the StrathSDR team across a number of different 5G projects, including our flagship one at the moment is 5G New Thinking, where we've built a 40-kilometre square 4G, 5G network up in the Orkney Islands. So in this set of slides, I'm going to give an overview of neutral hosting and basically methods to provide public coverage of a private network, essentially. My slides respond. There we go. So let's start with a quick review of the network terminology. So Catherine has just introduced what private networks and public networks are. So as a quick recap, your private network is basically a closed door network with a limited number of subscribers. The SIM cards for the private network are issued by the network operator, and only those SIM cards are able to connect to it. An example would be a small rural network where there's customers in the area potentially on broadband packages or whatever, or a corporate network where there's not essentially customers, but there's users at the factories and sites, whatever. Public networks, on the other hand, they're very similar, but the main difference is they can serve third parties too. And an example of a public network is a national MNO. The national MNO still has its own private network. It's still got its own SIM cards, but it can serve third parties through international roaming. Or another example is a small infill network that's provided at a train station or an airport, and it provides coverage on behalf of the MNOs and serves the MNO customers. So all the sort of slides and all the diagrams I'm going to present from this point forward are from a campus network point of view. So all of you can sort of imagine a geographically small network, for example, a network in a rural community. So this is a typical campus network. It's got base stations, which are connected over a backhaul to the core network. The backhaul is a mix of fiber and microwave radio links or whatever. Your core network is connected to the backbone fiber internet connection, and you've got a bunch of UEs, your user equipment, which is all running with SIM cards. So to build a typical private campus network, the operator will deploy 4G, 5G base stations, which of course require radio spectrum licenses. They'll deploy a 4G, 5G core, and they'll deploy SIM cards, which are then put into the user equipment. Now it's a limited coverage area, and devices will show no service when you take them outside of that coverage area. And the key thing to note about this private network setup is it cannot serve third parties. So if someone with a Vodafone SIM card arrives, they will not be able to connect to this base station. Now, if they wanted to provide service to third parties off this network, you basically need to take your campus network and kind of turn it into a public network. So there's two techniques that you can use for this. There's inbound roaming, which is also known as not spot roaming in some situations, and neutral hosting. Now, there's a fair bit of confusion floating around in the UK at the moment because we've got groups referring to both of these things as neutral hosting, but they are architecturally different and they provide different end user experiences. So I'm going to explain what they are separately. We've also got variations of these two technologies, which are used for indoor small cell distributed antenna DAS systems, which are used in the likes of the higher floors of skyscrapers and Canary Wharf and things like that, and indoor service at airports and train stations. But we'll ignore DAS for now because it's slightly different. So the first technique I'm going to talk about is inbound roaming. So here we still have our base station owned by our campus operator. We've still got our campus core as before, and the network is broadcasting what's called a PLMN. It's basically the network code equivalent to your Wi-Fi SSID. Now the campus core is connected to third-party cores via roaming interconnects. And these are standardized interconnects that all the MNOs around the world use for roaming purposes. And with this setup, it means third-party MNO UEs, so your Vodafones, your EE SIM cards, all that kind of stuff, they can roam into your network, connect through back to their core, and then get online. And that means they can make calls, send texts, and get on the internet. And an example of this that everyone can relate to is international roaming. So if we think about this from the UK point of view, we've got Vodafone UK public network. It has got a SIM card and a subscriber from Italy has come along and they're on the TIM network, and they are able to roam via the Vodafone core back to the TIM core and get online. It's not the best quality service. You'll normally be limited to 3G or whatever, but it works, and that's what all of us use when we go abroad. So if we look at sort of the pros and cons of this inbound roaming setup, third-party UEs can connect, they can roam, they can make calls, send text, get online. That's positive. Architecturally, it's pretty simple. You just connect your campus core network to third-party operator networks using the standard roaming interconnects. And there's a potential for a sort of new service provider to sort of be formed here, which is able to provide an inbound roaming core as a service. And what that could mean is your campus operator puts out their base stations, subscribes to this core as a service feature, and then the core as a service has someone managing it who deals with all the MNOs and has all the interconnections between them all. So it means that all that work is done for you, and building the network could be very simple. Cons with this setup is the third-party UE will take several minutes to connect on arriving. So if you think when you're in an airplane, you just landed in some foreign country, you turn off flight mode, it could be like 5 minutes before you get that text through saying welcome to Spain or whatever. And that's because your phone is going through a sort of polling loop of searching for its home network. And when it can't find its home network, it then starts looking at all the other ones and finds one to connect. And eventually it will find one, and it will. So that's something you need to be aware of for the inbound roaming situation. If you've got marginal home network coverage in the area, the UE will probably camp on that rather than joining the campus network. So let's say you're in the fringes of coverage in your rural community, and there's a little bit of 2G here and there from one of the operators. The phones will stay attached to that rather than connecting to your super fancy 4G, 5G network. And at the coverage fringe, so when you go between the campus network and the MNO's network coverage areas, there's no clean handover. So that basically means you will drop calls, the internet will go offline, and the phone will go into that back off period again while it searches for the operators. So that's not great. And one particular issue with that is it will drop 999 calls if you go across that fringe. There's some technical and regulatory issues as well, but we'll come back to that in a second. The alternative method for enabling public access on this campus network is to use neutral hosting. So here, we basically have the base station connected to multiple third-party core networks, and it broadcasts each of those core network PLMNs. So it's broadcasting the Vodafone network, and it's broadcasting the EE network, etc. And it's completely transparent to the end user. It is their home network that's on the ground. And the sort of big architectural difference with this is that the campus network doesn't even need its own core. It doesn't need its own SIMs in this situation, because it's not running its own network essentially. It's just hosting the other operators over the top. So pros and cons of this one. Third-party MNO UEs can connect to this campus network, and they believe it's their home network. They can make calls, send text, get online, all good. They will connect instantly, and they will connect to whichever base station is the highest power. So, as I mentioned before, on this coverage fringe, it will always go to whichever base station is sort of broadcasting the loudest. And clean handover is possible because we're sort of at a 4G interconnect level. There's frameworks in place to allow the user to basically be passed between your base station and the operator's base stations. So as someone leaves that coverage fringe and then transitions between the networks, they can maintain calls and texts and data connections and all that kind of stuff. Cons of this, it's architecturally quite a lot more complicated. And there's various network security challenges, which is something that the MNOs are always concerned about. It will likely require multiple sets of sort of VPN routing equipment and potentially multiple radios on the mast if the operators are unwilling to let you share physical radios between multiple operators. The campus operator will need to work with the MNOs and get them to agree to this neutral hosting setup. And it will need to be via something which is kind of JOTS style. Now, JOTS it's a neutral hosting framework which has been developed by all the operators in the UK for neutral host in building. And it's in building. It's designed for small cells placed, for example, throughout a shopping centre. It's not designed for macro outdoor coverage. So there'll need to be some slight variations on the JOTS framework, which no doubt will be a fair bit of effort to sort of get that tweaked to make it suitable for outdoor use. Again, there's technical and regulatory issues, which we'll come back to. So if we just compare these two options, the inbound roaming and the neutral hosting. So inbound roaming, much easier to implement. And if that third-party core as a service operator came into play, It's dead simple to implement this. The other option is neutral hosting. And neutral hosting is a far cleaner, far better service, but far more complicated to build. With both options, you've got various business-to-business models possible, because the campus operator is essentially doing the MNO a favor, by providing EE coverage in a rural community for the first time. You're giving EE access to new customers. You're giving them a number more kilometers squared of coverage, which gets Ofcom off their backs for increasing their coverage across the UK. So there's different business models available, such as you could maybe charge the MNO couple of £100 per kilometre squared per month of coverage, or you could charge them £1 per gigabyte of data served through your network, for example. Now, I'll add, I've not personally tested these models because all of our work with MNOs in this field has only been at testbed level so far. So as I mentioned, there's some technical and regulatory issues. So technical issues, first of all. No UK operator has yet deployed 5G standalone commercially. So that means that if you built a 5G standalone campus network, you would not be able to offer either roaming or neutral host connectivity on it just now because there's no one to connect to. Pure 5G standalone networks will also use voice over NR for calling. And the slight issue with that is voice over NR has only just left the lab and it's not really made its way into handsets, and it will be years before handsets sort of catch up across the UK and everyone has handsets that are capable of that. So basically, if you build a 5G SA campus network, and even if the MNOs deploy their cores, you won't be able to support calling, which is a bit of an issue. So if we focus right now on 4G and 5G non-standalone, which is probably where most networks will be for the next 5-6 years. Right now, a significant portion of the UK customer base cannot make 4G VoLTE because they're virtual network operators. That's the likes of the EE, the Tesco, Asda, all that kind of stuff. The giffgaff rather, not EE. They run on top of the MNOs. None of them support VoLTE calling. And this means that with either the inbound roaming or the neutral host, none of those MVNO UEs will be able to make calls. So that's again a bit of a deal breaker if you're doing MNO negotiations. So right now, unbelievably, the only solution we have in the UK is to deploy circuit switch fallback networks with 2G or 3G. And this would mean that your campus network needs to feature 2G and 3G radios, which could literally double the cost of your build. And if you're doing the inbound roaming setup, you will also need a 2G or 3G circuit switch core with its own roaming interconnects as well. And the regulatory issue. So right now, due to regulations surrounding the emergency calling, any network operator that's operating for public service in the UK needs to support the current UEs and also the old UEs that are deployed all over the place. And also the MNOs, the other rival MNOs and the rival MVNOs, and potentially people who happen to be in the country doing international roaming at that point in time. So basically, when you put all that together, it means that they must feature 2G or 3G radios for 999 calling right now. And it's going to remain that way until Ofcom updates the rules. So in this set of slides, I've introduced public-private campus network architectures, demonstrated the different solutions that allow service to the third-party UEs, discussed the pros and cons of the two options. And the main takeaway is this stuff is not as easy as it seems. There is a lot of historical problems need to be dealt with. To get rid of that 2G, 3G requirement today, people will need to get new phones, which is not something that can be enforced upon people. It just needs to happen naturally as people replace devices. The MNOs, or the MVNOs, all need to alter their core networks so that they support VoLTE calling. And Ofcom needs to change the emergency calling rules. Now, the UK operators have said they're going to be keeping 2G, 3G alive until 2033. And I think that's partly to do with the fact that the new smart meters that have been rolled out are running over 2G. So if they switch it all off, that's going to kill all the smart meters. So therefore, circuit switch fallback support is probably going to be on the table until then, if plans don't change. And we are kind of a long way from being able to offer 5G standalone neutral hosting in the UK. But all is not lost. Because there's been lots of recent changes going on from Ofcom, RE, enabling shared spectrum. So it's actually becoming possible for the WE network operator to go and build networks now. And we've got innovative UK companies are working on solutions to all these problems. And we're now at the stage where real world solutions are now becoming available for outdoor 2G plus 4G radios and 2G plus 4G roaming cores. And real world outdoor neutral hosting will happen because there's a very strong appetite from it across the UK. And Virgin Media O2 was the first UK MNO to trial indoor JOTS, and they did that in the sort of tail end of last year. So this is coming, so it will sort itself out. And yeah, the final thing is, if the emergency calling regulations get updated by Ofcom, that will sort of begin a cycle of, pushing everything into VoLTE, which will then make designing these networks a lot easier. Yeah, so that's me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kenny. Really kind of comprehensive introduction, and I think it's really helpful to kind of show those pros and cons. One of the things that we try to do at UK 5G is to be pragmatic about stuff. We're not trying to sort of, sprinkle glitter over everything. We want to make sure that we are honest and open about kind of some of the challenges. One of the great things about us as a network is that we do have access to incredibly clever people like Kenny, like Catherine, who understand these complexities, understand the challenges, and are there to kind of offer help and support for places as they are navigating their way around this complexity. Okay, so first one, Kenny, this might be a question for you. Catherine, you might have some views on this too. Question on campus networks. Given the challenges just comprehensively outlined, doesn't a Wi-Fi campus network make more sense right now versus a neutral host 234 5G? Kenny, I think I'm going to throw that one to you to tackle first off.
Yeah. Okay, so definitely for a geographically small campus network, such as coverage at a factory site or whatever, or council offices, yeah, Wi-Fi definitely has a place and will be far cheaper to implement and will be far less of a headache. If you want to build a network that is a little bit larger, over multiple kilometers, then that's where 4G, 5G and everything else sort of comes into play.
Brilliant, thank you. Next one, neutral host deployment with DAS model is quite a success recently, with the investment coming from landlords rather than MNOs. Do you see this trend set to continue? So Catherine and Kenny, probably throw that one at both at you.
I mean, I think Kenny would probably agree. The trend is continuing, and it's essentially the landlords taking control of the situation and being able to offer to their customers, their tenants, certain connectivity, and in some cases, even the tenants drawing down a DAS to offer connectivity either with one mobile operator or a multiple of mobile operators. So yes, but it costs money. So, and MNOs are not willing, unless they see a financial benefit, to actually bring their stuff to a site, let's say an office building, etc. Kenny.
Yeah, there was a recent study done by a business analysis company. I cannot remember which one, but it was reckoning that by providing DAS in the higher floors of buildings, it is significantly increasing the property's value, in terms of rent for, offices or whatever that are in the building. Because the issue with the tall building situation is all the national operators deploy their masts on buildings, let's say 5, 6 floors up or whatever, with their antennas pointing down at the streets. And that means that people sort of above those floors get nothing. So that's where DAS has sort of come into play.
Brilliant, thank you both. Question, Jasem, for you. So this is a really interesting one that's come through about barrier busting from a local authority perspective. So individuals saying we still face a lot of issues relating to 5G mast siting, even after working with MNOs at the pre-app stage, where applications are not taking pre-application advice into account and ultimately are then rejected. So what barrier busting support is offered by central governments to MNOs and their agents? This is a really interesting one.
It's a great question, yeah. And sometimes we have to be careful with the term barrier busting, because I think it can feel like local authorities are the barrier, and that's absolutely categorically not the case. And I also kind of want to make the point that It's not that local authorities don't know what they're doing, get in the way all the time. Sometimes, as Martin really clearly lays out, it's sometimes understanding on the other side isn't quite good enough. So what I'd really encourage you, Martin, to do is get involved in those workshops. If you kind of want to leave your details after this, through Vicki or however the best way to do so is, I can kind of have a conversation with you about the workshops and put you in touch with Sudawan, who runs them. But yeah, we do often make the point to MNOs that they do also need to educate the guys that are putting their planning applications to a greater extent, and understand some of the pressures that planning authorities are under. Things like opposition from residents, the fact that you guys have competing priorities from loads of different types of applications, the fact that actually sometimes quite technical information is kind of submitted to you, and you're kind of expected to know it when it's only a small part of your total remit in terms of from telecoms perspective. So it's a great question. We do hold regular conversations with the MNOs, and I promise you it's not all a one-way street. It is very much that they also need to make more of an effort to understand and educate. It's got to be two-way in terms of the knowledge process. Those conversations are a little bit more ad hoc. They're not structured solely around that. They're just in the course of regular meetings that we have with the MNOs over a variety of issues. But absolutely, please, Martin, please, yeah, I've just seen your email. Thank you very much for that. I'll actually add you after this call to those workshops and just reach out to hear more of your ideas as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I've just seen Martin's added in the chat that personal experience there, finding cornerstone and MBNL fantastic, but unilateral deployment is inconsistent. Martin, I think what I would add to Jasem's response there as well is that the final event that we're holding in this series is, as I say, around bringing together public and private sector, and we will have on that we're having a couple of fireside chats, one from a local authority perspective. Here's all the things that we want private sector to know, and vice versa. And the second part of that event will be online networking between them, both parties, if you like, to try and kind of help private sector understand some of those challenges and understand the reality of your requirements and from your perspective. So it might be that will be a good one for you to attend, to put your case across, as it were. So hopefully that will be a useful event for people. We've got a question about spectrum that's come through here. So what is the ecosystem readiness in 3.8 to 4.3 gigahertz spectrum allocated by Ofcom for private networks? What are the use cases or deployment models in this band? Who wants to take a stab at that one?
I guess that's really me. So the ecosystem is growing. It's not enormous. And as with any other kind of spectrum, it's really based on demand. There is availability in PCIe, everything from PCIe cards up to tablets. And PCIe cards up to tablets and telephones. Use cases are everything from AR, VR, HoloLens, mobility, autonomous vehicles, IoT, variety of things. It really is, private networks are very custom tailored, and therefore things that are in the private networks range, which is 3.8 to 4.2, are very custom tailored. Oftentimes what we have to do for our customers is look for a user equipment that actually fits the use cases and requirements that they have. As an example, I'm working now with a manufacturing company, and they're looking at AGVs for across their factory. And we are looking for very specific devices that actually fit their solution. So it is growing. It's something that UK 5G has been involved in, trying to promote that. Yeah, that's what it is.
Brilliant, thank you.
Kenny has more.
Yeah, just to add to that. So we've got 3.8 gig radios deployed at testbed sites, 4 different testbeds across the UK now, and we're mainly running them for fixed wireless access use cases. So there's two slight issues with the band. So in terms of a base station blasting out power, the license that Ofcom is able to supply for the shared access is pretty low power. So that's one factor. That means that the base station's sort of downlink coverage is not going to go very far. And the other issue is because it's quite a high frequency band, if you've got something like a smartphone handset, it's really going to struggle to get from the phone back to the base station at distances more than about a kilometer or so. This is one of the slight issues with 5G standalone and the higher frequencies, because if you've got your uplink and your downlink only happening in that higher frequency band, then that's your bottleneck. You're limited to your coverage is limited to how far the phone can go from the base station. If you're doing something like 5G NSA, where you've got a bit 4G in there too at lower frequencies, you can stretch the coverage far further.
That's true. And it's something actually we've raised with Ofcom through UK 5G and actually separately through Cellnex, is sometimes the power, which is either low or medium power granted by Ofcom, is not fit for purpose. So we're really trying to draw their attention to where the deployment is. Does it really need to be low power? Can we have a higher power? Yeah. So that's something that I know is under consideration.
Yeah, brilliant.
But you're absolutely right, Kenny.
Sorry, Kenny, I think this one is for you as well. So with regards to Volt, does this mean that MNOs are a better option for the general public than virtual MNOs when it comes to quality of calls?
Yeah, Volte provides better call quality, digital, higher bandwidth, all that kind of stuff, but there's not a great deal of difference. If you do the circuit bridge fallback, it'll just be a bit muffly.
Brilliant, thank you. And then the final question that we've had come through on the chat, and Catherine, I'm probably going to come to you first on this one. Does anyone have an example of a local authority building a neutral host network as part of a housing development?
I don't.
Okay. Yeah,
I don't,
haven't
sorry.
heard one either.
No. Kenny?
So as I said in my slides, the first UK operator to play with neutral hosting, with like real neutral hosting, is Virgin Media O2.
Yeah.
And they only just started the tail end of last year. So it's going to be some time before we start seeing this sort of out and about.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you everyone for a really great set of questions there covering a variety of different things. So that's great to have those questions and inputs, thank you. We have a little bit of time left before we conclude. And so there's a few questions that I wanted to put to the group. So firstly, and I put this kind of to all of you, we've talked about a lot of different options today. There's a lot of different things to consider when thinking about sort of securing connectivity and advanced connectivity for specific places. How do local authorities decide on the best route for their needs? So what really should they be considering in the first instance?
I think they should be considering what problems they want to solve. Instead of looking at it from a connectivity perspective, what are the issues they want to solve? Is it a connectivity poverty? Is it safety? Is it flow through of traffic through the center of town? Look at the problem first, and then talk to a service provider or go to UK 5G or DCMS and talk about what solutions there are. As Kenny said earlier, if you're looking at a small area indoors, Wi-Fi makes sense. If you're looking at a larger area, there are other things that make more sense: private networks, neutral host, etc. So start with the problem.
Kenny, anything to add from your perspective?
I'll just do a wee pitch for the 5G New Thinking Toolkit. So the main output of the 5G New Thinking project we're working on is to develop a toolkit, which is basically aiming to arm a rural community with all the information that they need to figure out, funding models, use cases, what technologies they might want to do, spectrum, all that kind of stuff. We're building this at the moment, and it will be released in hopefully a couple of weeks' time. So yeah, probably the biggest hurdle to get over is understanding your exact use cases, because when you figure out your use cases and know what you want to do, the technology falls into place. If you go in saying, right, I'm going to build my 5G standalone network, and then go, okay, I want to do neutral hosting, well, as I've described, you're going to encounter a lot of problems. So you need to figure out your use cases first.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that's really helpful. And you referenced there kind of rural areas, Kenny. From your perspective, with the new developments and new opportunities and models that come with 5G, what specific kind of opportunities or considerations does that throw up for rural areas that perhaps is different from kind of suburban or urban areas?
So not necessarily blinkers on 5G, a little bit 4G as well.
Yeah.
The main thing that is sort of a benefit for rural areas is the MNOs have kind of abandoned you a little bit. You know, there's marginal coverage when you get to rural communities. And as a result of that, there's a lot of spectrum available. So while there's the shared access band, such as the 3.8 band and the little slithers at other places, which is available UK-wide on a first-come, first-served basis, we also have what's called the local access license. And this is slightly more expensive, and you'll find it a bit of a battle to get the license application to go through. But it will give you basically access to any mobile operator band in your community that's not being used. So, you know, all the operators own spectrum at 700 megahertz, 800 megahertz, 900 megahertz, 1800 megahertz, 2100 megahertz, etc. There's this massive amount of spectrum, and in a rural community, they could be deploying nothing. So you can say, right, I want long distance coverage. So I want to apply for 700 megahertz license here, and you go through the motion, you'll get it. And because you're in your rural community, there's a very high chance that the MNOs will not be deploying there anytime soon. So that gives you some sort of business reassurance.
Brilliant, thank you. I've had another question that's come through in the chat, and Jasem, I might throw this one to you to get your take on this. But the question essentially saying, what should local authorities do to try and encourage MNOs to build in their areas?
Sure. Yeah, very tough one. Because on the one hand, MNOs will be commercially driven, will be driven by the need. A lot of the time, it's the need for capacity as well as coverage, which will mean population density is key, which will mean that rural areas. I see the conundrum. I would probably reach out to DCMS Combined Authority or the local government association, and we can start to see what we can do to put that sort of plan in place. Because while they are commercially driven, they do understand that they are trying to achieve the government's targets. So we'll see if there's something a little bit more niche that we can work out, if it's across a larger rural area or not. I guess the first, I don't have a silver bullet for that one, but I guess the first answer would be just to talk and to ask those at the likes of UK 5G and us and your combined authority, just to see if a strategy can be put into place. Because I do sympathise with that a great deal, that situation. I imagine it comes up a lot across the country. So yeah, just reach out and we'll try and set something up is probably the best answer I can give for that one.
Brilliant, thank you. And just to kind of build on that one as well, the next event that we have next Tuesday, the 8th of March, is looking particularly at how to secure inward investment. We will have speakers from Sunderland who've been very successful in doing this, and we will hear from the Infralink programme in Scotland, who's also doing a lot of great work in this space as well. So if anyone is particularly interested in the answer to that question, then do still sign up for next week's event, where we will be covering that. So one final question that I want to kind of come to each of you in turn on, which is really, as I say, we've heard a lot today. What's the one key thing that you would like our audience to leave today's event sort of understanding or thinking about? And Catherine, I'm going to come to you first, please.
I think I'm going to repeat what I said before, which is understand your problems.
Yeah.
And then reach out to someone, multiple service provider, UK 5G, DCMS, to figure out the best way to solve it, which might not just be one way. Yeah. I guess that's the first thing. And then I'm going to steal Jasem's one, which is there is funding out there all over the place. You have to dig around, but look for funding.
Brilliant, thank you. Kenny, going to come to you next.
Okay, so my big takeaway is probably, as has just been posted in the chats here, business models are changing. You know,
yeah.
Up until kind of the last few years, the players have basically been the mobile operators and corporate building small campus networks, whatever. But we're now at a point where, you know, spectrum is becoming democratized, if you like. You know, you'd be able to get access to spectrum if you want it. With push towards Open RAN and sort of more vendors starting to produce equipment and the whole RAN diversification thing, building these networks is going to become cheaper. And you know, with the likes of neutral host, it will come in the next couple of years. Suddenly we're going to see a shift towards the national operators being like one service that you get in the UK, and then third-party network operators on behalf of the national operators or whatever are going to be this new entity that's going to exist.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jasem, last but not least, coming to you.
I would say don't suffer in isolation or in silence, basically.
Yeah.
So if you're not sure where to start, or if actually you've developed a fair bit of a digital connectivity strategy and you are somewhere along, but you're just thinking about the next step, ask fellow councils, ask ADEPT, ask local government association, ask your combined authority, ask a sub-regional partnership that you work with. The chances are, if someone doesn't have an idea of best practice, they will be able to speak to someone who can speak to us, who speak to those in the industry, and some of the people that we speak in events like this, and we can start to formulate a strategy that works across a region. So just ask the question. I think it's the main thing that I would say.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you to all our speakers and panelists today as well. Really appreciate you sharing your kind of inputs, and thank you to our audience for being so engaged and asking so many great questions as well. That's always really great to see, so thank you. The final point I'll leave you with is we've touched on these actually already a little bit, but we do have 2 more events in the series. So same time next week, successfully attracting inward investment. And then the final event in the series is on the 15th. So again, 9:30 on a Tuesday, where we'll be looking at that kind of effective partnerships between public and private sector. As we have today, the idea of both those events is that they will be very kind of honest, open and pragmatic. So if you are interested in those topics, have either perspectives and thoughts to share, or would like to learn more about them, please do sign up. You'll find the link on the UK 5G website. The final point to say, and I'm hoping that somebody will be putting the link to this in the chat as we speak, is that your feedback is really important to us. We do have a survey about your thoughts and perspectives on today's event. We'll be sending this out by email afterwards. If you do have 2 minutes, please do take the time to fill it in. We're interested in understanding not just your thoughts on this event and how we can make these better in the future, but also potential other topics or areas that you would like us to explore in future event series. So yes, I can see the link to that is in the chat. So yeah, please do take the time to fill that in. It will help us to make sure that we're developing ever better and more relevant and appropriate content for you. So thank you very much for all of your attendance this morning. We will be circulating copies of the slides. We have recorded the event, and we will be sharing, publishing the recording on the UK 5G site. For those of you who maybe missed the first event where we delved into the 5G testbed and trials program but would like to catch up, the recording of that will be going up on UK 5G this week as well, so you can catch up on that if you missed it. Thank you very much for your time, everybody. Have a great day, and I hope to see some of you for the upcoming next 2 events as well. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.